What's going on, guys? It's Friday night, impromptu House of Orange live. But man, I'm fired up about this one. Got Jordan Moore in the house tonight. Been wanting to have this dude on for a long time. Jordan, good to have you in here, man. How's it going?
Hey, man, it's going great. I'm excited to be on here. I've been wanting to get on here for a while with you, so I'm excited to do this.
Tell us a little bit about. I've plugged you numerous times on here before, and I know some of the listeners are Papa J Backwoods in the house commenting here as well. But kind of plug. I've talked about your data, your analytics are second to none as far as Tennessee basketball, and it's really an untapped, I would say, area of Tennessee sports, basketball, football, like you and I talked about here as well. As you obviously put a lot of time into it and stuff, but tell us a little bit. I know you do stuff with Fox Sports Knoxville, but you've been across multiple platforms. Kind of tell us about where you come in, what platforms you go across and stuff. Kind of introduce our audience as we're kind of building up here a little bit along the way.
Yeah, so the main platform that I use to kind of put content out is X, Twitter. My ad's at Jordan Moore _21. That's kind of where I put a lot of the stuff up that I find. I also do, as you mentioned, Fox Sports Knoxville Fan Run Radio. I've been on their overtime show from 6 to 8 a lot. I do some hits on The Drive with Russell, with Bob's show from 10 to 1. I'll get on there with him. We have a really good working relationship. And then, I do a couple of podcasts. I do the Big Orange Breakdown podcast with Rusty Stevens. And then I also do the Channel Tennessee podcast from time to time. I'll jump on there. Those are guys that I tailgate with during football season. We've been really good friends. So those are the main places where you can find me throughout football and basketball season.
Good stuff, man. It's pretty cool to get out there. You've done some stuff with Vols. You mentioned you did some stuff with football right after the season too. I know some of the listeners on here really praised your work on that as well. I know you've been on other stuff, and like I said, obviously you and I've been on communication, but and I quote VolQuest on here a lot. You put an awesome breakdown of just what we're going to get into tonight on it. And I know there's been numerous UT media within the last week who have ran with your stuff. It's not a coincidence when I've started seeing this, where it's come from at that point. And I guess my thing with UT media, they get upset when people don't quote them. Hopefully they're giving you the quotes as well when they're using your stuff. But we're going to talk a lot of stuff here tonight with, we'll definitely go basketball. You mentioned football. We may get in a little football as well, but I think it's pretty fascinating based on, you texted me, hey, I found some stuff here, these lineups and stuff. You've posted your lineup analytics, your data with that as well. But then there's been more mention this week, especially against Missouri the other night. What was it, the 18-minute mark? All of a sudden, Zakai Ziegler, Chaz Lanier, Jordan Gainey, Igor Milicic Jr., Felix Akpar, and that team rolls from there. Where did you come up? Like, I know you've done your research on this and stuff, but what did you see based on your research that led you to say, hey, this lineup is what needs to be it?
Yeah, so about a week and a half ago, I was doing like a mid-season kind of just analytical stats deep dive on this team compared to the rest of college basketball. I was also kind of looking at I think we were getting ready to play Kentucky at the time, so I was kind of looking at that matchup and some advantages. And one thing that jumped off the screen to me that I looked at was the lineup that you mentioned and the offensive rating that they had when they played together. And it had me curious, so I started doing a kind of a deep dive on exactly how many minutes they've played together, how many possessions they've played together, try to get a sample size to see if it was a big enough sample size to run with. So when I dove into that, I found that it was a good sample size to run with. It's the second most utilized lineup that we have. But again, it's not the most utilized lineup that we have. And so I just started digging more and more into that lineup, into the data specifically with that. And then when I started looking at it across the landscape of college basketball, I started seeing that, look, based off the stats, it's one of the best lineups in college basketball in general, not just for this team, across the entire landscape of the college of basketball. It's the best lineup in the SEC. But what I kept coming back to was, if that's the best lineup statistically, in the SEC, one of the best in college basketball, why are we not going to that more often? So then I started digging into what games has that lineup played in. And I started looking at the Vanderbilt game that we lost in Nashville. We got down double digits, and they went to that lineup in the second half, and that lineup is the lineup that we had to come back with. Now, obviously, they didn't finish that off because of the Lanier missed free throw, but we stormed a major comeback in that game because of that lineup. Then I'm thinking, what if you had used that lineup earlier in the game? Maybe you're not having to come back from a double-digit game. Then I went and looked at the Auburn game. And that lineup, you tried to end the Auburn game with that. Unfortunately, Gainey fouled out and he had to come off the floor. And then you inserted Meshack. They tried to end the Auburn game with this lineup. And then what really caught my eye after I did all that data, looked all that up, is the Kentucky game. So going into the Kentucky game, I'm thinking, okay, I want to see what this lineup looks like in the Kentucky game. It played less than 2 minutes in the Kentucky game. And then it was all in the first half, right around the 16 to 15 minute mark in the first half. And I'm like, why are we not playing this lineup when on paper it is clearly one of the best lineups? So that's when I really started texting you the things that I was finding. That's when I texted you and I said, hey, look, I found this, and, I may want to jump on with you and kind of discuss this. I couldn't clear my schedule enough time to get on here before the Missouri game. I wish I would have, because that would have blown up. But now that the Missouri game happened, and I can't remember, I think I might have texted you during the Missouri game and said, look at the lineup that's in. And sure enough, it was a lineup that I had texted you about, and we saw what happened in the second half. And as you talked about, now it's the Knoxville media has latched on to that. And I kind of just wish that I mentioned to you before we came on here that I'm in the middle of doing an article right now talking about that and breaking down the analytics. I wish I'd have got this out before the rest of the Knoxville media got a hold of it.
Yeah, man, this is good. And I think it's interesting you mentioned, too, that the Kentucky game, that you say less than 2 minutes?
Less than 2. I think it's 1 minute and 34 seconds that it played together.
That's pretty crazy to me. So have you looked at like the Illinois game or because I don't think the non-conference schedule was really indicative of this team. I think it was a fairly weak schedule. Other than, I think Baylor was a good win. Virginia, I think based on what that team did against Virginia, I thought it was a good win. I mean, the first half, I saw people, and you see it too, first half, this is the worst offensive team. This is a 4 seed. And then all of a sudden, the second half against Virginia happens, and it was pretty good. Baylor, they dominated. Illinois, I think, was a real – I think up until SEC play, that Illinois game was really the game for Tennessee. But you mentioned the Auburn game stuff. Pretty fascinating, the Kentucky game, less than 2 minutes. How many minutes in the Auburn game did this lineup play together?
It played 8:13, and it was plus 12 in that game, and in the box plus minus. And as I mentioned, they tried to end the game with that when they were up 4. And then unfortunately, Gainey fouled out, and then Auburn had their comeback. And then you mentioned the Illinois game. They played 0 minutes together in the Illinois game. They didn't start – they started playing more than 5 minutes together in a game when SEC play started. And then I can give you their box plus minus in SEC play. Against Arkansas, they played 8 minutes and 41 seconds. They were plus 13. Against Florida at the Swamp, they played 4 minutes and 52 seconds together. They were minus 5. At Texas, they played 5 minutes and 42 seconds. They were minus 6. Against Georgia, 6 minutes and 54 seconds plus 9. The Vanderbilt game that I mentioned, when they didn't insert this lineup in the Vanderbilt game until midway through the second half, and they played the last 12 minutes together. It was plus 9. Mississippi State, it played 6 minutes together, plus 4. The Auburn game, as I mentioned, 8 minutes together, is plus 12. The Kentucky game, 1 minute and 24 seconds. It was minus 3. Kentucky took one shot. They hit a three. We took one shot, missed it. That's why it's -3. They did not appear together, obviously, against Florida because Zakai and Igor was out. And then this past weekend against Missouri, the most minutes that it has seen together this season was 13 minutes and 24 seconds, and it was +18.
Wow.
It's +66 on the entire season, and it has played half the minutes together that our starting five has, and it has a better box plus minus than our starting five with half the minutes played.
That's crazy. Is the starting five the most commonly played lineup this season?
Yep. And unfortunately, it is if you go off of lineups in the SEC that have played at least 40 minutes together, it's statistically our starting five is the worst one in the SEC. I think there's 8 or 9 lineups that qualify with at least 40 minutes played together in the SEC. The lineup that we're talking about has the best rating, offensive and net rating. Our starting five has the worst.
Really? That's pretty incredible. So where does I don't know how deep you've gotten into it, but the lineup of Ziegler, Lanier, Gainey, Milicic, and Akpar, where do they rank in terms of best lineups in the SEC? How far have you gotten into that?
It's the best.
Out of any lineup of any
lineup.
team?
Yeah, if you obviously got to kind of put a minutes minimum in there because there are some lineups that play 5 or 8 minutes. But when you kind of, I'll put it as 40 minutes. That kind of put I think 30 minutes there was 27 lineups. 40 minutes there was right around 10 lineups. If you do 30 minutes, it's the third best lineup in the SEC. If you do 40 minutes, it's the best lineup in the SEC.
That's crazy. Based on, I guess, have you done like efficiency per single player also?
I can get that. If there's somebody specific that you want me to look at, I can grab that for you. I've also done it in 3-man combos. And the unpopular opinion, which is what I texted you about a week ago about how I wanted to get on here and had an unpopular opinion take. The unpopular opinion is Meshack's a detriment more than he is a positive. And people are going to say, well, how hard he plays, his defense, what he brings, etc. And that is all true. But him getting more minutes than Jordan Gainey with Lanier and Zakai, Meshack has a role on the team. I don't want anybody to think I'm casting to the side that he's unplayable. But playing with Zakai and Lanier, he doesn't fit. Gainey fits that. And there's a significant drop-off in the metrics across the board between Zakai, Meshack, Lanier, and Zakai, Gainey, Lanier. And it's a pretty significant drop. So to me, we saw 2 years ago when Zakai got hurt and tore his ACL that Meshack played the point guard role. Well, right now you have Gainey playing backup point guard as he comes off the bench. I just think all you need to do is just switch Gainey and Meshack's role. Put Gainey into the starting lineup and allow the lineup that we're talking about get the most minutes every single game and let Meshack just back up Zakai and let him get the backup point guard minutes because, as we're talking about, the lineup with Gainey in it is just so efficient. I mean, their offensive rating is over 130. That would be the best. Like right now, Auburn is number 1 on KenPom. I'll look them up real quick. They're number 1 on KenPom, and their offensive rating is a 130.8 as a team. The lineup that we're talking about is 133.3. It would literally be the best offensive lineup in all of college basketball.
That's pretty wild. I'm pulling up KenPom here as well. I've had that Auburn game. Me and Auburn fans did not jive on that weekend because I was pretty animated after that one. Auburn is not on my Christmas card list. Auburn fans aren't at this point. Let's just put it there. But yeah, looking at KenPom here, so they've got Tennessee 33rd. They've got Tennessee back to number 1 defensive rating right now. Where is there anybody like looking at You mentioned the 5 guys. We talked about Meshack. We talked about Dubar, Phillips. We've not talked about Dubar, Phillips, Boswell. How do the lineups adjust when those guys come in? Is it any – obviously it's less efficient than the main 5, but how does a guy like Dubar – do you think Dubar is not getting enough opportunities? He's getting too many. He's getting enough. How do you feel about him? Because he's kind of a hot topic as far as, he'll have a game and then we'll see him like 3 minutes like we did against Missouri. Based on what you've seen out of him, how do you feel like his minutes are? Do you feel that they're fair, they're not enough, or what?
Yeah, I think it's really, a game-to-game basis. And I mean, the Illinois game, he came in and he hit some big shots and played really well, and he looked like he was a guy that could contribute. The Texas game, the same thing. He came in, played really well, hit some big shots, looked like a guy that contribute. But then you turn around and look in the Missouri game, and I mean, he had an awful night in the Missouri game. He's had a couple of those. He's just one of those guys that I think you're just going to have to take it game by game and kind of just fill him out and kind of see what he gives you in specific games, because he's just so inconsistent when he gets put into the game. And he's inconsistent on both ends of the floor. And, I've seen you mention a couple of times, and I'll harp on it a lot. If you're not going to play defense, you're not going to play for Rick Barnes. Mm-hmm. And he has a lot of missed assignments and falling asleep on the defensive end. So especially when his offense, like the Missouri game, he was missing free throws. He was missing shots right around the rim. I think it was Barnes last year said, look, you got to give me something. I think he was talking about Cam Carr right before the season started, when he was talking about Cam Carr. And he said, look, you got to give me something. Like on one end of the floor, you have to give me something. If you're not hitting shots, then I need you to rebound the basketball, assist, steals, do something to let me play you. And Dubar the other night against Missouri wasn't doing anything. He wasn't giving you anything. If he's not going to play defense, then he needs to give you the free throws that he missed. He needs to give you the layups that he missed, and he wasn't giving you that, which is why he didn't appear again in the second half. So, with Dubar, there are games where I feel like, okay, he's found himself. He's going to start getting into the rotation here, but then he'll show up and have a clunker like he does against Missouri. Then you think, man, this kid's unplayable right now.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. And you mentioned Cam Carr. It's a hot topic. We'll hit that one here as well. It's a lot. I'm going to hit a couple comments here. There's Papa J in here. I told you Papa J promoted you. He had messaged me. He's like, hey, man, this dude was on the Vol Bros. It's like, yeah, it's good stuff. Backwoods team. Backwoods been on here a couple times, man. He's got some good stuff. I wish I could get him on. Backwoods is back in his rec league playing now. Said he'd come out of retirement after a few years last weekend. Got to hear some more, see how his Backwoods, Tennessee. If you've not checked him out, he's got a YouTube channel as well. Got a big following. Some really cool stuff on there. Check that out if you haven't already. Brad Lipford, member of the channel. 2 good wins this week. You messaged me last night too, man. Big win for the Lady Vols last night. I had gone out on the limb earlier in the season. I said, they're going to get one of these, either LSU, South Carolina, or UConn at home. And I'm starting to think that might have been a little full of it, but Lady Vols got in from a historical perspective. That's the one. That was the one last night. From my perspective, still living right now in South Carolina, I would have liked to see them got in South Carolina because I'll never forget last year, the last day of the regular season, Tennessee playing Kentucky, and then the Lady Vols were playing South Carolina. I'm not a Tennessee alum, my wife is, but we were at an alumni watch party downtown Greenville, Yeehaw Brewing. Bon Secours Arena is right up the hill, less than a mile away, and Kentucky beats Tennessee on it. And then so everything switched to Yeehaw to the Lady Vols South Carolina game. We're feeling pretty good. And then the ultimate debacle of defenses happens. South Carolina fans there. And it's like, I left okay that the Vols lost to Kentucky because Kentucky shot the lights out. I was torn up for a couple days or Lady Vols, and that kind of led me to like, all right, maybe I need to explore covering the Lady Vols, and we went from there. But yeah, 2 good wins. I know you were fired up last night on it. I was fired up over it. That was pretty awesome. I bleed orange in the house here. The General, what's up, General? Still bouncing off the walls. Yep, big victory last night. Bob Franklin, what's up, man? Good to see you in here. This Lady Vols team is definitely competitive. We'll see where they go. Long way to go in this one. And then Oliver in here comments on your stuff. Interesting stats. Absolutely. And your stuff, not only basketball, you did a lot with football too, right? You analyzed a lot of the plays. And we could get into that too. You mentioned going into that, you analyzed differences from like 2024 versus the other years too, right?
Yeah. I looked over the years of, Josh Heupel offenses, plays that they ran, comparison of what's different, what defenses did to us and how they played us different. Just statistical of what his quarterbacks have done in the past. I dive into, our most utilized plays, what we utilize the most. So I do a lot of the same type of stuff that I do with basketball with football. And this coming football season, I'm contemplating kind of getting into some like opponent preview articles and starting to put that stuff into some written form instead of just popping it up on X or Twitter, and kind of giving more visuals on that. But yeah, I do the same. What I do for basketball, I do the same stuff for football. It's been very interesting for me, a year ago, 2 years. I mean, looking into the stat stuff, I've done this pretty much my whole life. Like ever since I've been in high school, I'm a sports nut. I love basketball. It's my first love, my first passion. And so I've always kind of dug into the statistical, analytical part of it. And I had a friend that I've grown up with. I would always send him this stuff, and he finally told me about a year ago. He's like, "Man, you need to put this stuff up on Twitter." He's like, "People will like this." I didn't think anybody would. I thought I was just being a nerd, like just digging into the stats and analytics. And I did, and obviously people are liking it. You've told me how much you've enjoyed it. I've other people tell me they enjoy it. I've had friends from other states like, man, there's people that are friends with me that I didn't think would even know who you are. Like they'll send me text messages and, hey, did you see this guy's stuff? Like, yeah, I know him. It's wild how it's kind of for me just blown up over the past year, and I'm thankful for it. That people enjoy the type of stuff that I put up. It's fun for me. I love the engagement. I love the interaction with people. I love talking about it. I don't have any other hobbies, so this is all I love to do.
Yeah, it's cool. And my thinking of it is you've got like your VolQuest, your 24/7. I like some of the stuff on Rocky Top Insider. I think they bring some good stuff as well. I've honestly not kept up with the new Rivals stuff, so I can't. But I mean, I would think they got to be fairly credible as well. There's other stuff out there. There's tons of podcasts. There's lots. It's like, I don't know. I go back and forth on live game stuff. Like, anybody's listening, I'm going to get back into live basketball Tuesday after Kentucky. I've had to take a break. I've texted you. There's a lot going on for old Frank right now, but
it's a lot to do. I mean, it really kudos to you for putting out as much content as you do. I mean, you turn it out a lot. It's always really, really good stuff. It's always interesting stuff. It's a lot of time consuming. So, I'm sure, it's hard for you to continuously pump that stuff out. And so that's kudos to you for putting in the time and putting in the work to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I look at it too, though, versus, well, my full-time job's a teacher. If I wanted to go out and get a part-time job, well, the amount of hours I'm going to put in versus, the monetary, it makes a lot more sense to do something like this. But I mean, you've got to get enough of a following, but it's like, still, there's a lot of channels. There's some through YouTube. There's some through various outlets. My thing with it is my only competition's myself. And I hope there's a lot of Tennessee fans that are looking for just good content, and hopefully everybody is bringing good Tennessee content. If they're not, it's pointless. I mean, it's really not. And but I'd ran across your stuff. Like, it was not long after I'd started this channel, and it's like, man, this is pretty good stuff. Me being a math teacher, I dig the analytics, the data as well. But where do you think this Tennessee staff now has seen, like, we've got this lineup that's working? Do you think we'll see more of it as we go forward? Because tomorrow, I mean, you go to Oklahoma, this is a team that's not looked real good, but then all of a sudden they beat Vanderbilt by 30 last weekend. So do you think it's a case we'll see more of it? Or is it, well, we'll see how the game goes, and then, if things get a little tight, we'll go to this lineup? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I think once we have gotten into SEC play, especially about halfway through SEC play, they have started to utilize it more often. So that's one thing that I'm going to be curious to see tomorrow for the game is exactly how early do they go to it. I don't. It's been a big talking point really the past 48 hours about do you change the starting lineup? I mean that's a big ask for Jamai. It's a big ask for the staff. I don't see them doing that. I don't think that they'll take Jamai out and insert Gainey. Now, my problem with that is I've had a lot of people that I've sent this stuff to say it's not about who starts, it's about how many minutes people play. And that's always been an old saying, it's not about who starts, it's about who finishes and how many minutes somebody play, which is true. But my issue that I've been saying to people is, okay, you keep this starting five. Gainey always comes in at the first TV timeout. Well, usually what happens when you bring Gainey in, guess what else happens? Somebody else comes in with him, right? Cade Phillips will come in for Igor Milicic. So now guess what Gainey's doing? He's not playing with the best lineup that we're sitting there talking about because now you just brought Cade Phillips in, or now you just brought Bishop Boswell in, or Dubar, as we talked about. So when you're making these substitutions, it's not always just Gainey coming in for Meshack. It's Cade Phillips coming in for Igor. It's Dubar coming in for Lanier, or Bishop coming in for – so then you're not even getting that best lineup together. So I've been saying it should start. It should get the first 4 to 5 minutes of each half. So there's 10 minutes right there. And then in the middle of these halves, you can give Zakai a rest and bring Meshack in. You can give Igor a rest, bring Cade Phillips in, and then end the game with this lineup that we're talking about. That's what I would like to see. I don't think the staff's going to do it. So what I would like for them to start doing is getting to the lineup more often and maybe earlier in games, because as we talked about at the beginning of this, the Vanderbilt game, right? They didn't go to that lineup for the second half. Well, what happens if you use that lineup in the first half? Now, Zakai was in foul trouble. I'll give them that, right? The Auburn game, you didn't go to that to the second half. What happens if you go that earlier in the game, right? Maybe you're not having to have these miraculous comebacks like the Vanderbilt game or like the Missouri game because you're jumping out early. You're having success early. You're not having to climb out of a hole. Somebody said it perfectly the other day, and I'm going to steal what they said, their line that they said, but this lineup shouldn't be a lineup that's break glass in case of emergency. And that's what they've kind of been doing here lately. It's break glass. It shouldn't be. It's your best lineup. It should be playing more often. It should be playing the most minutes and the most possessions.
Yeah, I agree with you. And now, have you noticed any with Akpara? It seems like with him, it depends on his foul trouble. So, like, I don't know the consistency of the lineups because obviously Ziegler plays most of the game. Barnes he's kind of interesting how he deals with like Chaz and some of these. And Gainey, I feel like has more leash than Chaz Lanier does from a perspective. To a point, I feel like he does. Is there? How do the lineups look? I don't know. How often have they gone to? I would bet you've come up with this. I may be wrong, but Ziegler, Lanier, Gainey, Meshack, Milicic. Have they gone to that lineup very often?
Looking at it right now, and for the entire season, they have not utilized that at all.
Really?
Yeah.
I kind of wondered with some of those cases where Akpara may have gotten in foul trouble if they could have utilized that or not. So, because I would think that one could kind of work because Milicic is I would almost say he's a better rebounder than Akpara, but he's more versatile. But so that's interesting as well. How do you feel like a Cam Carr or a JP Estrella would have affected this lineup this year? And I know this is theoretically speaking, but
JP would have helped a ton. He was going to be one of the most improved players on the team. His strength levels were up. I mean, just imagine as you're just talking about when Akpara gets in foul trouble, you're bringing JP off the bench. Like you're not really missing a lot. JP's, he's really, really good. So him going down, that really hurt. Because then you kind of get undersized when you got to put Cade Phillips in and then maybe put Milicic at the 5 from time to time. Now Milicic is 6'10". So losing JP was massive. The Cam Carr thing, I had heard all summer long that it wasn't going right. And there were still a lot of issues there. Just maturity wise, not doing the things on a daily basis that he needs to do to make an impact, inconsistent play in practice, inconsistent play in scrimmages. I was told a couple of times by 2 different people that there were days during the summer that Cam Carr would show up and he's the best player on the floor. Lottery pick. Nobody could stop him. Could score at will, play great defense. And there were days he'd show up and Rick would just, get into him because he'd come down and just turn the ball over and try to play one-on-one offense and go down to the other end and give up a back cut and not box anybody out. And so it was just all summer long, up and down, up and down. It was basically the same thing as his freshman year. So, the phrase that I was told coming into the season is that the Cam Carr situation may be the most frustrating situation for this entire fan base because the person told me that, he wouldn't be shocked that if there was a game during the season, Carr scored 24 and then the next night play 5 minutes and score 4 just because there's no consistency of him on a daily basis or in games or in practice of knowing what you're going to get from him. Going back to what we were talking about with DeBar, just the inconsistent play. So seeing how he started the season wasn't a shock to me because it was what I'd been hearing behind the scenes. How he left, it's a different story on that end, on how that whole situation went down. And now I got to be careful on how much I pile on there, but I'm old school when it comes to things, and I believe in finishing things out once you start something. Sam pretty much packing up in the middle of the season, and I put it on Twitter, I think right before the Florida game, when it was said that Zakai Negro was going to be out. Packing your things up and walking into the locker room and telling your teammates and your coaches to their face that you quit and walking out, I ain't a fan of that at all.
No, especially when you're not playing because you've been out hurt. It's not like he was just being set out. And his role was continuing to increase. That's the most puzzling decision I've seen, especially when he's going to walk on at Baylor. How much truth, based on what you've heard, was there to Tennessee passed on, and regardless of his numbers, Tennessee passed on Cade Tyson because they were afraid of Cam Carr leaving? How much truth is there based on what you know to that?
It's true.
That's a tough one to me because I know Cade Tyson is not burning it up at North Carolina, but who is burning it up at North Carolina? That's probably one of the most underachieving teams in the country right now. So, Cade Tyson in Knoxville, who knows, man? Based on his game, if he's not going to play defense, like you mentioned earlier, he's going to have a time. But a lot of these guys, too, learn to play defense. I would much rather Rick Barnes to get guys who know how to play offense but need to be taught defense. And Cade Tyson there could have fit pretty well in Knoxville.
It's a depth piece that you need right now. Having a roster this short, I mean, just having him on the roster, even if he's not as good as people thought he was going to be, if he can just give you 5, 6, 7 minutes a night just to give some guys some rest, it's a depth piece. And that's what hurts with Cam Carr doing what he did. I mean, the kid was going to play. I just didn't understand. I mean, I understand what the family was thinking from hearing things on what they were thinking. I don't agree with the decision, but he was going to play. The kid was going to play. As soon as he got healthy in January, Barnes had said in multiple press conferences leading up to his departure that once he got healthy, they were going to rely on him. They were going to feed him minutes. They needed him back. They needed his depth. And the kid was going to play. And they decided to bounce and get out of Dodge and get out of town. So, yeah, having a K. Tyson. And here's the thing. I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? Like, I mean, if Rick Barnes had known that halfway through the season that Cam Carr was going to quit and walk out, they probably would have took K. Tyson and Cam Carr would have quit and walked out back in April. So, hindsight's 2020 on that thing. They didn't think that the kid would do what he did. So that's why they passed Cade to keep Carr. They believed, I'll say this, they believed in Cam Carr's potential. Everybody believes that kid is extremely talented. He's extremely talented. There's NBA GM that he was popping up on mock NBA draft boards back in the summer. Just because
I saw some of those like 7th or something. It was like, wow.
Just because of his athletic ability. I mean, he's an athletic freak and he shows offensive, potential. So everybody believed in his potential. The staff wanted to invest into him. The staff wanted to bring him along and get all this potential out of him. But again, the inconsistency and the immaturity didn't allow that to happen. So hindsight's 2020, the staff, I'd say, wishes they had took K. Tyson now.
Yeah, because Carr showed out at the Tatum Elite Camp, or I can't remember if that's the exact name, but it was the Jason Tatum camp, in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
That he showed out and got some really rave reviews out of it. You at this point in time with college athletics the way they are, can you really afford to turn down a quality piece with how volatile the portal is?
No. I'll say I bet this is the last time we have less than 10 scholarship players.
It has to be.
I think Barnes has learned his lesson on that one. I mean, again, you couldn't. Well, I was going to say you couldn't see JP getting hurt, but that's another topic. Is like he had struggled all summer long with that foot. They tried to nurse him along all summer long. They tried to keep him out of scrimmages and keep him out of practices. It's kind of, again, hindsight's 2020. I bet now they wish they would have had this surgery back in the beginning of the summer instead of trying to keep him off of it and healing on its own, because you may get him back halfway through the season instead of losing him at the early part of the season. So you got to find a way to fill these scholarships up. There's like let's use Zakai for example. We've not had a true backup point guard since when you had Kenny Chandler and Zakai, really.
Yeah.
You brought in BJ Edwards, it didn't work, he left. You brought in Freddie DeLeon, didn't work, he left. I heard a lot of media outlets in Knoxville saying, well, you can't get anybody because who wants to come back up Zakai Ziegler? And he's playing. Well, I get it. I understand that. But other college programs have starting point guards that play 35 minutes, and somehow they can find backup point guards.
Yeah.
Why can't we? It's just like, we talked about football. I had heard, all last summer in the portal, you're not going to be able to find a quarterback to back up Nico. Like, everybody knows Nico's starting. Other programs can find quarterbacks to back up quarterbacks, and our backup was a freshman. So you gotta do something and find ways to make sure you have depth, because we see with this team, it only takes a couple going down and you're in a bad spot.
Well, you mentioned too about Zakai and Kennedy Chandler. They played simultaneously often and were pretty effective when they did. Something tells me that Barnes could have found a way. There was, what was the name? Collins? The brother visited recently.
Zyree Collins.
Yeah. The what was the one from St. Louis? Was it Yuri?
Yuri, yeah, that's Zyrie's older brother.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't find a way to get him in. I don't know what happened with that one. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I've seen the same comments you've seen about, well, who's going to come and back him up when he's playing 35, 38 minutes a game? Like I said, numerous programs are making it happen. Why can Tennessee not make it happen?
And I think
it's going to be really interesting to see what they do after this year, because I don't think this fifth-year rule is going to be passed. So you're going to have to replace most of this roster.
Yeah, going to the first thing that we were talking about, talking about like Kennedy and Zakai, they played so well together. Zakai plays really well off the ball, and he played really well his freshman year. And I think going back to what we initially talked about with this lineup, Gainey can bring the ball up, and I put Zakai off ball. That works. We're seeing that work when other people can help Zakai bring the ball up and initiate the offense. And that helps Zakai. So this whole, not having anybody back up Zakai because you could have played them together. You already saw it work with Kennedy, Chandler, and Zakai, and now you're seeing it working again with Gainey and Zakai. You could have brought somebody in and allowed them to be on the floor at the same time. So I don't buy that excuse. I just don't. What was the other point that you said? I forgot. I was going on that topic.
Just talking about next year, where they're going. I mean, they've got most of the roster to replace. I mean, you should be pretty good down low, but
the fifth year thing, man, that was brought up about a month ago, and I've been hopeful that maybe they can get that thing done to allow Zakai, Gainey, and these guys to come back, but it sounded like it may not happen, and if it doesn't happen, that's going to be really tough on this staff and on this roster, because you're going to have to replace a lot. Your front court will be set with Phillips, Akpar, and JP. They'll be back. You got a freshman coming in, Dwayne Brown, so there's your four guys there. But your back court, it's going to be tough. You're going to have to find some guards and some wings to come in and be ready to go. And in the portal area, it can happen. It can be done. I just the one thing that I worry about in these situations when you're losing this much is, can you keep the culture intact? Like that's so hard to do when you're having to turn the roster over so much. Who's going to be the leader of the team? The last handful of years, you've had Zakai Ziegler. Last year you had Zakai, Josiah Jordan, and Santi setting that standard and holding that culture tight. This year you got Zakai and Meshack holding that culture tight and setting the standard. When those guys are gone, who on that roster is setting the culture and holding that standard for these guys coming in?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to hit a couple comments and I'll get right back to what you're saying here. Tim, glad you made it in, man. We waited all night on it. We waited till 8:37 to start without you. But no, good to see you in here, Tim. Oliver said, I think Baylor tampered. I guess maybe so. Rhonda, what's up? Good to see you in here. Good evening, everyone. Late, but go Lady Vols, go Big Orange. It has been a great week. Who would have thought, based off of last week, the Vols losing that freaking game against Auburn, and then I still think part of the Kentucky game was a hangover. I really do, coming off that Auburn game, because I fully expect Tennessee's going to go to Kentucky and beat them on Tuesday night. Now, who knows? But we'll see how it is. We just talked about this one. I don't think the chances are good at this point that Ziegler and Meshack get another year. I just don't. And we'll see. I hope it works out, because I think you get Ziegler, you get Meshack back. We'll see on Chaz. We'll see on, Igor, because those guys are out of eligibility as well. But it looks a little, because I'll be honest right now, looking at recruiting, Mallory, is it Ament? Is that how you pronounce it, or is it Ament? I've never heard the correct. So Ament Burries, I guess is how it's pronounced. I know Tennessee's in those. I don't feel confident they'll finish any of them.
I felt on the Ament kid, he took I think it was the unofficial for the Kentucky game.
Yep.
And I felt pretty good coming out of that visit. From what I was told, the family really likes Tennessee. The kid really likes Tennessee. The culture, the program, Rick Barnes. Now I do know that his NIL asking price is significantly high. It's so high that he would, I don't think Tennessee's going to do it. If Tennessee did do it, he'd be the highest paid player ever under Rick Barnes. But I don't think Tennessee's going to go down that road. So, but coming out of the unofficial against Kentucky, I felt pretty good about Ament just because of the way the family was talking and their love for the program, the culture, and Coach Barnes. But then he took the official visit to the Duke, North Carolina game, and now the whispers coming out of that is Duke may be the front runner for his services, and that's tough because I think he's ranked 4th nationally, and I mean he's really, really good. And that, as we're talking about with the roster next season, he could be somebody that come in and give you a punch on the offensive end.
Based on how Barnes has used freshmen over the years, would the money be better spent getting a guy like him, bringing him in, or getting a veteran out of the portal, or multiple veterans? You could probably get multiple veterans for the price. I know you probably saw the same article I did on 3. I can't remember which one of them it was, said that Tennessee's NIL it was pretty competitive. So obviously, based on what you're saying, that they put in a pretty good offer. But, I think back to like Julian Phillips, Springer, Keon Johnson, all these guys, and different guys have made different contributions. I look back Julian Phillips, he started off the year, I thought, really good. And by the end of the year, he's barely getting on the court. So I have to question, would they be better off spending that money on Ament, or would they be better off getting some veterans out of the portal? What you're thinking on that?
I'll ask the same question a different way. Would you rather have Nate Ament for a year, because he's going to be one and done? That's the whole goal. Or would you rather have Felix Okpara, Igor Milicic, and Chaz Lanier? Because what they're likely getting paid is right around about what you're going to have to pay Nate Ament to get to come for 1 year.
I'm taking 3 versus 1 in that, especially based on how Barnes uses freshmen.
Yep.
Because he's going to hold them to his standard. I mean, he's old school. If Ament comes in and doesn't want to play defense, he's not going to play.
Yep.
On it.
I'm in complete agreement. Yeah, I would rather go out and get 3 to 4 veteran portal guys that have a proven track record of being successful than spend money on, a player like Ament. And the other thing is, and just off the top of my head, when is the last time you've seen a national championship caliber team be led by a freshman? I mean, I know Duke right now with Cooper Flagg is having a great season, but it wouldn't shock me if they kind of don't get bounced or, Sweet 16 and Elite 8 in the NCAA tournament because they're so young. Young teams right now in college basketball, they have a hard time because of the portal, of NIL, of the extra years of eligibility because of COVID still being there. You've got a lot of older veteran teams. Some of these teams are 22, 23, 24 years old. And if you got a roster like Duke that's 17, 18, 19. I mean, to me, the perfect example of what I'm talking about was 2 years ago when we played Duke. You had Euros and Josiah and Zakai and Meshat, all those kids, they're all 22, 23, 24 years old. And that Duke team was all freshmen. And we flat out punked them in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, Kamwa punked them.
Yeah.
Big time in that one. I mean, I really kind of think at this point, those big-time freshmen need to be more of a compliment than the centerpiece.
Yep.
Because I'm like you, Flagg. I mean, he's great. He's great. He's one and done. But they're going to run into that veteran team. I mean, you look at Auburn right now. How many of those guys are transfers with Auburn? And some some freaking guy tried to tell me Auburn's on pace to be the greatest college team ever. I'm like, dude, you're crazy. They're not even. He's like, well, it doesn't matter what you say. The stats matter. Come on, man. There's teams, especially back. I still the greatest college team I remember seeing, and they did not even win national championship. Was it 91 UNLV that got beat by Duke in the semifinals? Team was amazing.
The one that I always reference back to was, I think, is it 99 Duke that lost to UConn? Didn't that Duke team go like 37-2 or 37-1 or something? They had like Shane Battier, Carlos Boozer, Jason Williams, Mike Dunleavy. Like,
they lose in the Sweet 16?
I think they lost in the national championship to UConn.
Okay. That team was loaded. I mean, look at some of the Kentucky teams. I mean, you had Wall and Cousins and Bledsoe on that team. They got beat by West Virginia. I mean, this Auburn team couldn't hold a candle. None of these teams could hold a candle to those teams.
The Memphis Derrick Rose team was really, really good that lost to Kansas.
Yeah, that was a surprise. Kansas, I can't remember who Kansas had. Kansas won it all that year, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, I think that was the only Final Four that had all 4 number ones in it.
I think so. I think you're correct, yeah.
But it's, I think based on, are you surprised, kind of shift back on that, but a lot of good points. Are you surprised at how well Barnes has adjusted to the portal?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that, to me, that's been one of the biggest things to continue this success is his ability to evolve and adapt. And it's not just with the portal. I think he's also evolved and adapt offensively, schematic-wise, too.
Yeah.
They started running a lot more NBA type stuff. And I think some credit needs to be given to Greg Polinsky, one of the assistant coaches. He's got a very long NBA background of experience. And, he came in a handful of years ago, really, I think right after COVID maybe. And, I mean, the program went to another level after COVID, right? You won the SEC tournament, another regular season championship, an Elite Eight, a Sweet 16. So that's kind of been my biggest thing, too, is just Barnes has adapted and evolved. Now, I still wish we'd have a little bit more offense. I wish there was a little bit more adaptability in there. But he has adapted and evolved. And you look around the landscape of college basketball, and a lot of coaches his age have bowed out and left. And he's still holding on strong, and he's still evolving and adapting. And he mentioned it back in the summertime, I think. A lot of that credit goes to his assistant coaches because he lets his assistant coaches pretty much handle a lot of the work, and he's kind of just like the closer when it comes to making decisions and the recruiting and so forth and so on. His assistants do a lot of the work, and he's pretty much just the final say-so and everything. So his ability to kind of take a little bit of a hands-off approach, give more to his assistants, and also adapt and evolve, it's been very impressive, and it's allowed him to keep this run that we're currently on going.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up, Eric? Member of the channel. Says, what's up, Indy and Jordan? Indy kid, old name, old channel, multiple identities here. What a great win for Vols. Lady Vols beating UConn. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned, so one of the last, I think, games before COVID was against South Carolina and Columbia. I was there for that one, actually. Was that Vescovi's first game, if I'm not mistaken? And then it come down to somebody missed a free throw. It bounced off, and Josiah Jordan-James had a perfect baseline shot and missed it at the buzzer. I think it would have put it maybe in overtime. I don't think it would have won the game, but it was South Carolina was flopping the whole game pretty much because Fulkerson had, the patented Fulkerson spin move down the lane, and they had it sized up to flop anytime that he run it. But I think a lot of people assumed when NIL with all this that Barnes was right behind all these other guys, but I've been impressed with like you said, it's not just so much how he's adapted to that, but it's his offensive philosophy, because I still have, for numerous reasons, the nightmare of Florida Atlantic Madison Square Garden. That to me was just like, that was one of the down points of the Barnes era, because I thought that pathway was set up perfectly to get to the Final Four. And I was, I was coaching baseball at Dutch Fork here in South Carolina. Going up to that game, some of the players I was coaching was like, hey, FAU's going to beat Tennessee. Said, I'll bet you poles, running poles. Any of you that's familiar with baseball, you run poles for punishment. And it's like, yeah, I'll bet you that one. Well, guess who got to run poles at the end of that one? It was me, because I bet on Tennessee. And they sat and egged me on. It was pretty cool. But still, yeah, that game was just a nightmare. Florida Atlantic. And here we are now, how they've adapted, how they've gone forth. It's going to be interesting next year. It's going to be interesting, because there's basically, like we said, Akpara, Estrella, hopefully he comes back good. Cade Phillips, if I'm not mistaken, is he not supposed to have a pretty good mid-range game?
Yeah, he's actually been working on his jump shot. I'm kind of surprised he's not maybe taking a couple more this season, but he's been in practice, and throughout the summer he has been working on his jump shot. And I thought the one that even though he missed it the other night, I thought it looked clean, it looked good coming out of his hand. But the good thing with him right now is, as Barnes mentioned a couple of times, he just knows his role, understands what's asked of him, and he plays that role to a T. He's not trying to do too much. And that's a sign of a really smart basketball player, when you don't try to play outside of your comfort zone. You do what you know you're really, really good at. But I do think that he's developing as a player, and he's going to continue to develop that outside jump shot.
Yeah. Let's see. Eric, I'm giving you a hard time, man. No worries on that. You can call me whatever. It's fine. Akpara's had some good games here moving forward. Yeah, I was thinking Phillips, and supposedly Estrella has a outside game. Is that right?
Yeah, coming out of high school, he could shoot the three. He's one of those cases that you hear about to where he was a guard, and then he grew a lot throughout his high school career, so he still had those guard skills and could still shoot the basketball. So that was something that they kind of wanted to showcase with JP this year. But as we talked about earlier, unfortunately, the foot injury happened, and he's not allowed. He couldn't showcase that this season.
It's going to be interesting to see where this team. Hot topic. I mean, you and I have texted a little bit about it, but is there a world where Barnes says I'm done after this year?
I think that's I think there's a possibility. I don't know if you saw, you probably did, about 2 weeks ago, when Barnes said that, if he didn't have Zakai, he's not sure he'd still be doing this.
Yeah.
That goes back to what we were discussing a little earlier about that 5th-year rule. I think if that 5th-year rule got passed in time for Zakai to come back, I don't think there's a doubt in my mind, your mind, or anybody's mind Barnes would be back. I do worry that this potentially being Zakai's last season, that once this season's over with, he kind of just looks around and hangs it up, and just they both ride, Zakai and Barnes together, kind of both ride off into the sunset with each other, and that'd be tough. It would really be tough for the program. To me, he's the best coach we've ever had, the most successful coach we've ever had. But when you combine Zakai leaving, and as we mentioned, having to rebuild, almost half of your roster for next season, I could see Barnes being 72 and looking around and just not having the energy to want to have to commit to building a roster and developing that roster throughout the summer and for another season, and kind of riding off into the sunset. So I don't know anything for sure at all. I haven't heard any whispers of that at all, anything, but I would just say that, just cherish him being our head coach while we have him, because whether it's this offseason or potentially maybe next offseason, I don't think it's very much longer when he's done.
Yeah, because you're not going to have, barring that 5th-year rule doesn't get passed, you're not going to have that culture of Ziegler, Meshack, these guys carrying on the culture like you've had. I mean, you've had that luxury of having guys, Vescovy, Josiah Jordan James over the years. I mean, it's going to be up to Cade Phillips, JP Estrella, Akpara now being in the program. It's going to be a tough one to carry on when you're going to have to replace most of the program next year. I think it. Yeah, I caught that comment too, and I thought it was pretty interesting.
I'll also say I don't think Barnes is the type of coach that if he doesn't think we can be successful and win at a high clip, I don't think he sticks around either. I think if he sees a dip coming, that he may just hang it up. As we're talking about with that roster losing so much next season, you're gonna have to replace a lot. I don't know how. I mean, you can go out and add guys in the portal, and they could probably bring some really good guys in. And we may be successful again next season and be a top 25 team and make a run to the tournament. But it's going to be much harder next season than it was this past offseason.
Do you see them going outside of the Barnes staff to hire? Do you think they could promote maybe Gainey or Clark or Polinsky? Could they promote any of them possibly?
I'll answer that two ways. One, I think Danny White's the type of person that it's going to be his hire, who he wants. I don't think he would want to promote from within the staff. I think he's going to want it to be his guy. And two, I'm not a fan of that aspect of doing that. I'm not a fan of just promoting a guy because he's on the previous guy's staff, no matter how long they've been there. I would want them to go out and have a legitimate search and interview other candidates and find the replacement for him. And I think, as we have seen, Lady Vols is a perfect example of that with Kim Caldwell. I think Danny White has a very long proven track record of he knows what he's doing and he can hit on head coaching hires. So I would have full-fledged faith that when that time came, he would nail the hire again, because that's pretty much what he does as an athletic director.
Yeah, and going off that, I mean, we've seen it with the Lady Vols, Holly getting promoted. We saw how that worked. We've seen it in North Carolina a couple times with Guthridge. Now Hubert Davis. Yeah, they had some success, but it's not always the best element. And Shire's doing pretty well at Duke right now, but I think he's more the exception rather than the norm with it. Can we go ahead and mark the two popular names with Tennessee? It's going to be for two different reasons. If Barnes were to retire, oh my gosh, Oliver. I will tell you what, if this happens, I'm going to put this one up here. I won't be watching Tennessee basketball. I'm throwing the towel in at that point. But can we go ahead and mark off Bruce Pearl and Nate Oates? That's going to be the two popular names. You've probably seen them. You frequent the same places I do, and that's the two names that always get brought up. Can we mark those off?
Yeah, Bruce Pearl will never be the head coach of Tennessee ever again.
No.
And Nate Oates, there's whispers out there that North Carolina could be making a move on Hubert Davis, and the now Indiana job's coming open. But I think both of them may target Nate Oates. And those are blue blood programs, and Alabama is not a blue blood in basketball. So I could definitely see a scenario where Nate Oates takes the North Carolina job or takes the Indiana job. So I don't think either one of those are a possibility when the time comes. I think what you got to look at, and this is what I said whenever he made the Lady Vol hire, just look at his track everywhere he's been. And it's very, very likely not going to be a big-name coach at a power school. That's not what he does. He goes for these mid-major, young, up-and-coming coaches, and he takes a shot at them. And it's worked out pretty much every single time so far. So to me, when you're looking at the next potential head coach of Tennessee basketball, look in the mid-major level, look for a younger coach And offensive oriented. That's what he goes for. Offense wins, and it also sells tickets. And he also wants to sell tickets. You want to. I mean, it's fun watching the Lady Vols play. That's fun. That's a fun brand of basketball to watch, the Lady Vols. And so imagine that on the men's side, right? We all remember the Bruce Pearl days, the pressing and the offense and the shooting the threes, and that was fun. So I think when you take those boundaries into account, I think it's going to be a mid-major coach that's offensive oriented, young, and kind of plays a modern style of basketball.
You're a pretty big fan of Samford's coach, right?
Yeah, that's my number one target, Bucky McMillan. He's cut from the same cloth as Nate Oates, former high school basketball coach, won multiple state championship at the high school basketball level, young, modern style of basketball, offensive oriented. This 4-year run that he's had at Samford is the best 4-year run in program history. He's setting all kinds of records at Samford. They play a high tempo basketball. It's pretty, his style of play is basically Kim Caldwell on the men's side. They press, steals, push tempo, shoot a lot of threes, up and down the court, play a deep bench, play a lot of guys. So it's basically Kim Caldwell just on the men's side. Now, going back to what I was talking about earlier, Bucky McMillan is from Alabama, grew up in Alabama, has lived in Alabama his entire life. So if Nate Oates leaves, I would bet a lot of money that the next coach of Alabama is probably Bucky McMillan at Samford.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You mentioned North Carolina and Indiana. Indiana's coming open. They've already said that, what's his name? Woodson is leaving. If Hubert Davis gets let go, what would be interesting to Tennessee fans is if Nate Oates goes to North Carolina. Bruce Pearl has openly said before Indiana's his dream job. Who's to say that the state of Alabama doesn't get raided? And I'll tell you what, man. I've not had much interaction on here for Alabama fans, so I don't have much to say on them. Nothing would please me more than see Auburn fans just get left out in the dark. And I've got a good buddy of mine, actually, who's an Auburn fan. But nothing would please me more than see those pricks get left out in the dark and have to go find a coach. Because, Pearl did the same. He put Tennessee basketball back on the map. He put Auburn basketball back on the map. One way or another with Pearl, it's not going to end well. It's just not going to. No. He's not a guy who's meant to have the roses and the flowers and all that. It's going to be, something is going to happen, whether he leaves to go to an Indiana or the NCAA or whomever buries him at some point.
I'll real quick, I'll give you another name to look for as we're talking about mid-major coaches, and you probably have heard of him, is Josh Schertz at St. Louis. He was at Indiana State the past 3 years, and before that, he was at Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. I'm pretty sure he won a Division II national championship there, set all kinds of records, went to Indiana State, completely turned that program around, had like the winningest stretch, I think, since Larry Bird played back in the 70s. And now he's at St. Louis, and he's already exceeded their win total from last season and their conference win total from last season. They're 13-9. They only won 12 games last year, so he's already exceeded that. So if it's another year or two when Barnes retires, I think Josh Schertz at St. Louis is a name to keep an eye on if he's able to take St. Louis and improve them on a year-to-year basis like he did at Indiana State. And he's also a guy that's young, plays an up-tempo style. They play modern basketball, and they shoot a lot of threes.
So I bring up it's a good point, because I think that would be an interesting guy. If you're Tennessee, if Barnes were to retire, this is all theoretically speaking, and, he's going to coach until he wants to, but my thinking is, and tell me if I'm wrong, if you were going to get a veteran guy, I think you've got to get one of these guys like a Jay Wright out of retirement. If you don't, you might as well get the up and coming person. I don't think you're not going to go steal a guy from a big school that's doing well, like a Dan Hurley, for example. You're not going to go steal him and come to Tennessee. Why would you? Why would he leave if he's winning? A Jay Wright is a guy who's been successful, who's out there, but he left the game for a reason. I don't think he's coming back to college, maybe NBA or something, but at that point, why not go and get the up-and-coming person with it?
Yeah. Jay Wright's been a popular name amongst the fan base that everybody wants. I don't know if that would happen again. He, as you mentioned, he stepped away because of NIL. Now, I will say that when you compare Villanova and Tennessee's NIL, Tennessee's going to have a lot more money and a lot more resources than what Villanova had. So there could be a small enticement there for Jay Wright to say, look, if I'm going to coach again, I want to be somewhere that's going to back me and give me the resources I need to build a roster. And if that could be one to where maybe Danny White does kind of go outside his norm and basically give Jay Wright a blank check and say, come win some national championship at Tennessee. I mean, that could be a possibility. I don't see it happening, but if Jay Wright's going to get back in the game, he's going to get back to a program that's going to allow him to have the resources to win in this new landscape of college basketball. Another name that's been semi-popular amongst the fan base that I've kind of mentioned maybe 2 years ago. What happens to Billy Donovan in the NBA? He's not been very successful in the NBA. The Bulls are not very good. So how much longer does he just want to stick around the NBA and kind of be mediocre and not really win anything of significance in the NBA for the rest of his career? Or does he look at it as, I can get back into the college game at maybe a school that will give me the necessary funds to build a roster? Because, he won 2 national championships at Florida. So, but those are just 2 names outside the box of maybe if Danny White does go outside his norm, that maybe he shoots for the stars, and maybe those 2 names.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see, because I think, like I said, you give Jay Wright kind of a blank check, that might change things a little bit along the way. That it's a good question here. Mason Guest says, do you think playing in that that NIL tournament, do you think that changes things? I don't know exactly how much NIL they're getting. That's in is it Las Vegas that they're playing next 3 years?
Yeah, I want to say that I'm not 100% for sure on these numbers, but if I want to say maybe the winning team of the tournament this past year got 2.5 million to divide amongst its players. So, a couple $100,000 a piece for each player is about what they got. Now, I know next year's tournament, the pool is going to be even bigger because there's more teams. I don't know what the champion gets, but every team in that tournament gets something, and that's given to the players. So, that's a good point too. That could help him build a roster. And that's extra NIL funds that Tennessee itself doesn't have to come up with. So that could kind of help them build a roster. I still go back to the point that you and I were talking about, though. Just if Zakai's really gone and you're really having to replace 5, 6, 7 guys on the roster, I just don't know how much a 72-year-old, almost 73-year-old Rick Barnes really wants to have to do that and then spend a whole summer. And I mean, because you also got to think too, he's having to instill offense, defense with basically a whole new roster. He's not had to do that in the last handful of years, because 2 years ago, all year long, all you heard about was Josiah Jordan-James and Vescovi running practices and running team huddles. And Barnes could take a step back. And then here recently, Barnes mentioned the same thing about Jamai, how Jamai can just run a practice and run a huddle, and he can just take a step back. Does he have somebody like that next year? Probably not.
Yeah, I agree. 9 million they went. If that's the case, that's game-changing money.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I don't know what the basketball NILs are. I mean, I'm sure they don't approach what football is, but still, that's big time. But see, I think we're going to get into wrapping this one up. This has been a good one tonight, man. A lot of good stuff. I will hit this one. We're going to, Carrie and I are going to do baseball preview Monday night. We're going to kind of sum that up. I will just, without going too far into this one, Tennessee has a real shot to repeat this year. A&M's going to be tough to deal with, but this Tennessee team is absolutely loaded. Have some pretty good conversations about every single day on that roster. They are freaking loaded this year. Not a lot of proven, but their talent level is crazy. That's on that team. They reload. They don't rebuild anymore on that. Wish we could have got into football. We'll definitely have to set that up, getting some football talk, because I know you broke down a lot of stuff with how defenses play them as well along the way. But based on what do you expect tomorrow from Tennessee? What do you expect the rest of the way? To you, based on what you've seen, what is this team's ceiling versus what is their floor?
Yeah, I think tomorrow you need to go into Oklahoma and take care of business. It needs to be a business trip. You need to go there. You need to get this win. Oklahoma, they've had an up and down season. They got some really good non-conference wins before conference play started. They struggled a little bit in conference play. Kind of just giving a little bit of a preview to them. They play a lot of small ball. They're not a very good rebounding team because they do play small. They also give up a lot of points in the paint because they do play small. Their three-point defense is really, really good, but a lot of teams don't take a lot of threes against them because they just throw it inside because, again, how small they are. Ranked around, I want to say, 40th or 50th in KenPom defense. So go in there tomorrow, take care of business, play good defense, get out with a win. And then next week is revenge week. As we talked about earlier, you play at Kentucky, and then Vanderbilt comes to town. I'm calling that revenge week because you need to revenge those two losses that you have. If you do that and you can win these next three, you're setting yourself up for a potential number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Because the good thing is, although we've lost some games, other teams across college basketball have also lost some games. And despite us losing, 3 out of 5, I think, here recently, we're still a top 5 team, and it's because other teams around us are also losing. So go out here and click off some wins. Keep yourself in contention for a number 1 and number 2 seed. And if you do that, I think your ceiling for this team is another Elite 8 appearance. And depending on that matchup, you could probably get to a Final Four. The floor, I think, is the second round of the NCAA tournament. Going back to the Elite 8 thing, Tennessee was the 3rd best team in the country last year with Dalton Connect.
They just happened deal on the draw, yeah.
They just happened to run into the 2nd best team in the country in the Elite 8. So, yeah, this team, depending on the draw, they can get back to an Elite 8. If they, going back to what we started this podcast with, if they lean into this lineup that we've talked about and give it more run and it stays productive as it is, that lineup can get them to a Final Four.
Is there any scenario you could see them cutting down the nets?
I think it comes to the matchups, what happens in the NCAA tournament, if you get the right draw. A lot of this is about getting the right draw. Alabama last year, nobody thought they were going to make a Final Four, right? They got the right draw. That should have been Tennessee's bracket, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Arizona got the 1 seed. That should have been Tennessee getting the number 1 seed. So, yeah, I mean, if you line it up right and you hit the right bracket and some upsets happen and stuff like that, and you don't run into an Auburn or a Duke or maybe a Florida or something like that in the Elite 8, sure, you can make the Final Four. And then NC State made it last year. They got hot, made a run. So there's a scenario there where if you play ball really good at the right time, you can get there and win it all. The top 6, 7 players on this team, that's good enough to win it all. They just got to shoot the ball well, play good defense, and have the matchups fall their way.
It's going to be interesting. I think, like you said, matchups are going to be a big part of it down the stretch. But any final thoughts before we get out here, man? Good stuff tonight. Any final thoughts before we move on tonight?
Hey man, not much. I enjoyed the discussion. Love being on here, man. Again, I'll repeat what I said off the top. You do great work. I appreciate the time that you put into your channel, into the videos that you make. I'm sure your viewers also do. You give a lot of really good content, a lot of really good breakdowns. So I want to tell you personally that I know there's probably times where, it's hard on you. It's a lot of time consuming, but there are people like me and people out there that watch your channel that do appreciate the time and work that you put in, and just keep doing what you're doing, and it'll keep building itself. And, you know, as I told you, you're my go-to source for baseball season, and we're getting into it. So I'll be here watching the rest of your content. And as basketball season goes on, and as we get to football season next year, I would love to hop on more with you and do more content and stuff with you. Because, you know, I enjoy your work.
Man, I appreciate it. Those are great compliments. Cannot thank you enough on that. You're always welcome on here. Glad we've finally been able to find a time to hook this up, but we'll talk when we go off there. But you guys, we appreciate you. Make sure you hit that like, that share, that subscribe. You know, that's the biggest ways you can help the channel, really, is to share that out, word of mouth, getting it out there. As we're under 100 to get to 3,000. That's a pretty good goal at this point. But he's Jordan. This is Frank. This is the House of Orange. You guys have a great rest of your evening. And last but most certainly not least, go Vols.